The me who can change. The you I cannot change. Relational tuning begins with me. Learning self-switching does not make the world suddenly change. There are still many people who do not move the way I want. Some people do not understand, even when I say the same thing again. Some people clearly hurt others and still do not change easily. So in relationships, we often feel this way. I'm trying this hard, so why won't that person change? How many times do I have to say it? Why is that person always the same? But there is one fact we need to accept first in relationships. What I can directly change is ultimately the energy arrangement on my side. Of course, people can change. I can change, and the other person can change too. But I cannot press the switch inside the other person's mind for them. If the other person does not move from within, it is difficult to change them only by pushing from the outside. That is why relational tuning usually has to begin with me. Not by controlling the other person, but by first seeing which ego state I am entering the relationship with. Before trying to change someone else, I need to look at myself first. The harder a relationship becomes, the more I want to analyze the other person. I want to know why that person acts that way, what the problem is, and how to fix them. Of course, that curiosity is natural. But if my attention locks onto the other person too quickly, I can easily miss how I am reacting inside the relationship. In some relationships, I always enter through CP. I try to fix, correct, and teach the other person. In some relationships, I always enter through AC. I endure, adjust, and read the room until my own mind disappears. In other relationships, FC bursts out first. So emotion comes before anything else. So to tune a relationship, I need to ask this first. Before, why is that person like that? I need to ask, which mind am I entering this relationship with right now? Only when this question exists can the relationship become a field of tuning rather than a fight for control. The first handle for changing a relationship is on my side. When the other person does not change, people easily lean in one of two directions. One is pushing harder. The other is giving up completely and resigning themselves. But tuning is a little different from both. Tuning is not breaking the other person. It is not simply letting myself be hurt either. It is choosing my own response again. If I have always endured, this time I can try saying even one short sentence of my own intention. If I have always spoken as if teaching, this time I can open a little more space to listen first. If I have always exploded emotionally, this time I can first notice the tension in my body before speaking. When I change the arrangement on my side, the air of the relationship may also begin to change. I had a similar experience when I was running an academy. There was a period when the students' grades came out the best. Coincidentally, it overlapped with the time when I was studying applied statistics through Korea National Open University. When the students studied for exams, I also sat at the front desk in the classroom and studied my own material. When students asked questions, I answered them and then returned to my own study. At that time, I was not only pushing students with words by telling them to study, I was showing them the act of studying first. Perhaps that atmosphere reached the students a little as well. Even if the other person does not change immediately, the repeated automatic reaction loop may shake a little. So the you I cannot change does not only mean resignation. It is closer to this. Because I cannot directly change the other person, I begin by looking at the place I can change. There are times when we cannot know the other person's egogram directly. Of course, the best way to understand a relationship is for the other person to take the egogram test directly as well. Then we can see the structure together more accurately than by guessing. But in reality, this is not always possible. The other person may not want to take the test. The situation may make it difficult to suggest the test. In that case, we can very carefully estimate the other person's graph and overlap it with ours. What matters here is not getting it right. It is not defining the other person either. It is drawing a temporary map in order to see the flow of the relationship more clearly. In other words, this is not diagnosis, it is observation. It is not judgment, it is a hypothesis. Rather than saying, that person is originally like this, we carefully say, In this relationship, this energy seems to stand in front. Who leads the direction more between the two? The first thing we can observe is who leads the direction of the relationship more often. When the two are together, whose intention does the situation usually follow? From the meeting place to the conclusion of the conversation, the pace of the relationship, the emotional temperature, and the ending of conflicts, does the flow keep leaning toward one person? If so, we can consider the possibility that that person's CP is operating more strongly than the others. That is because the power to set standards and lead the flow is greater. On the other hand, if I keep being led and the other person's standard is carried out more often than my own opinion, my CP may be relatively weaker than the other person's, or the other person's energy may feel stronger in the relationship. For practice, following the tone of the manuscript, we might estimate roughly like this. If the other person leads very strongly, plus 10. If the other person leads somewhat more, plus 5. If I lead more often, minus 10 or minus 5. If both are similar, keep them at the same level. However, this number is not an exact diagnostic value. It is better to understand it as a temporary scale for estimating the direction of relational power. Other ego states can also be read together inside the relationship. In this way, we can carefully estimate the other ego states as they appear in the relationship. If the other person often cares for others, looks after them, and holds the relationship together, MP may be standing in front. If they calculate first and move while weighing gain, loss, and reality, A may be stronger. If they reveal moods and emotions immediately and react strongly to the atmosphere, FC may be relatively open. If they often read the room, adjust, and endure discomfort for a long time, AC may be strong. If they do not bend easily and their own way and persistence feel strong, we can consider the flow of SC. But here too there is something we must remember. This is only observing what appears inside the relationship. It is not defining what the person is originally like. People appear differently in different relationships, and different ego states may stand in front depending on the situation. When the graphs are overlapped, the relationship begins to become visible. If we place the other person's estimated graph over my own graph, the flow of the relationship that was hard to see alone can become a little clearer. Who sets more standards? Who adjusts more? Who reveals emotion more? Who endures and persists more? Who pushes their own way to the end? These things begin to appear at a glance. Then the way we look at conflict also changes. Instead of saying, that person is strange, we begin to see structure. This relationship is flowing this way because of the difference between CP and AC. Here, my FC is too dim, and the other person's CP is too far in front. When structure becomes visible, it becomes a little less likely that we will be swept away only by emotion. And from there, room for tuning begins to appear. Relational tuning eventually returns to autonomy. When we lose autonomy inside a relationship, we easily move toward two extremes. We try to control the other person too much, or we hand over the steering wheel of our own life completely. But autonomy is not the power to handle the other person however I want. Autonomy is the power to regain ownership of my own response. Why am I so stirred up right now? Why do I become small only in front of this person? Why do I repeat the same lines whenever this scene appears? When I notice my automatic reaction through these questions and can choose again from there, autonomy finally comes alive, even inside the relationship. So the core of a relationship is not holding on to the other person and changing them. It is returning to my own place and choosing my response again from there. Using Torbit TA AI is also one option. When reading an egogram alone, I may be able to see my own structure to some extent, but the flow of the relationship or the direction of tuning may not be clear. At such times, Torbit TA AI can be used. What is meant here is not a general AI. It means a dedicated AI that contains the content and structure of transactional analysis made tasty through Fables, Torbit TA. In other words, it is a tool that reads egograms and relationships together in the language and flow of this book. You can first enter only your own result and ask questions. For example, how can I supplement low CP? Or what daily practices can I do when FC is too low? If both people's results are available, you can also ask about the positive and negative flows of the relationship. For example, you can request, please explain the positive scenario and the negative scenario between these two people. You can also use the data comparison function to check roughly where your score is located. For example, you can ask, where does my A score stand? And check your own position. Currently, it can be used as follows. Chat G PT version of Torbit T A AI Gemini version of Torbit T A AI. But here too, what matters is this. Torbit T A. AI is a tool that reads the map with you according to the structure of this book. You still have to drive. The core of relationships is ultimately returning to my place. People often forget inside relationships. They forget where they are standing right now, which mind they are responding with, and where their part ends and the other person's part begins. Then the desire to change the other person grows too large, and the right to tune one's own life keeps moving outward. So the core of this section is simple. Trying to understand the other person is necessary. Reading the structure of the relationship is also important. But the starting point of all of it is ultimately seeing which mind I'm entering this relationship with right now. I can change. I can respond a little differently. I can use my voice more. I can attack less. I can endure less. I can step back more accurately. On the other hand, I cannot directly change the other person. That fact is painful, but it also gives freedom, because now I do not have to cling only to what I cannot do. I can return to the place where I can act. In the end, relational tuning is not holding on to the other person and changing them. It is returning to my own place and choosing my response again from there. When I begin with the me who can change, the relationship can finally begin to move little by little in a different direction. The me who can change, the you I cannot change, does not mean giving up on the other person. It means distinguishing between the place I cannot change and the place I can change. When that distinction appears, instead of pushing the other person harder or resigning myself to everything, I can choose my response again. And that choice becomes the first handle that slowly changes the air of the relationship. Tuning that begins with me moves the relationship from a fight for control into a field of choice. When a relationship is difficult, we easily become caught by the desire to change the other person. But in Torbit TA, the starting point of relational tuning is not fixing the other person. It is noticing which ego state I am entering the relationship with. Estimating the other person's graph is not diagnosis. It is a temporary map for seeing the flow of the relationship. When that map helps the structure become visible, I'm less likely to be dragged only by emotion, and a small space for choosing again appears. Autonomy is not the power to handle the other person however I want. It is the power to regain ownership of my own response. Our dedicated AI may read the map with me, but I still have to drive. In the end, when I return to the place where I can act, the relationship can gradually move from a fight for control into a field of tuning and choice.